So good morning. My name is Chris Yates, and I have the privilege of being president of SHPOA this year. So I'd like to welcome you to our spring meeting. We put a lot of work into this meeting, and I think the topics are going to be of great interest to everyone. So thanks for coming. Let me just begin by thanking Harbor Square Theater for letting us use their facility again. They're a great partner for us, and we appreciate it very much. I'd also like to thank Sam Weirman for providing today's refreshments. I'd also like to take a minute and put a little bit of a plug in for SHPOA. You'll see the trustees wearing their white shirts today, and I'd like to thank all of them for the work that they have done. I think you'll see in this meeting today the depth of commitment that they bring to their positions and the expertise that they offer in many of these areas. So I appreciate them very much. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about what SHPOA does. I know there are some folks here who are not members, and we welcome you today. But you know, SHPOA plays many different roles. You know, we are advocates for property owners, many of whom can't vote here. We attend the council meetings. We focus on the policies, whether they're financial policies, policies related to beach management and replenishment, the bay, just the whole range of issues. And we try to bring to the table, again, a lot of expertise. We've got among our trustee groups people that know a lot about these topics. And so we try to offer that to the council and other professionals in town. We focus on other issues. You'll hear about the Harbor Hustle, which is becoming one of the marquee races along the Jersey Shore. We sponsor Tuesdays at the Tower during the summer. The concert series that are held on Tuesday evenings. We name a Citizen of the Year. We do Projects of the Year. So there's a lot that we do. So if you're not a member, we'd invite you to come along with us and participate in that. So I think that's enough for me. Like I say, we're going to try to stay on time today. Oh, before I do that, I should introduce some of our guests. We have Mayor Tim Carney. We have Councilmember Bunny Parsick. I always hesitate to do this because I'm afraid I'm going to miss somebody. Do we have other council members here today? Yeah. That's it, okay. So anyway, welcome. We always appreciate when you come and hear what we have to say and engage with our members. So why don't I pass this over to Homie Kapedia, who is our vice president, and he'll pick it up from here.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. So thanks. Again, a warm welcome to all of you. I'd like to start as both Vice President as well as Chair of the Nominating Committee by first welcoming some of our newest trustees. So since our membership meeting in September, we have 5 new trustees. If you can all stand, the 5 of you. And again, welcome them. They're all... So tied to 5 new trustees, we are always looking for more trustees. We are at full capacity right now, but we have terms ending in September. So there are specific skills that we're looking for, one of which is in technology, one of which in municipal government, and we're looking for someone with marketing capabilities specifically. But if you're in general interested in serving, please do contact us. Either on our website, there's a nominations spot that you can get to, or just pick up the phone and call one of us. We'd love to talk to you about being a trustee. One other initiative that Chris mentioned that we're soliciting nominations for right now is a Citizen of the Year. And this is someone who's had an outstanding impact, a significant impact to Stone Harbor. Doesn't have to be a resident of Stone Harbor, but has to have had an impact and made an impact to Stone Harbor. You can see some of the attributes we're looking for in terms of leadership, involvement in the community, basically obviously having a positive impact, and then a long-term commitment to Stone Harbor. So we're soliciting nominations right now. We need them in by the end of July, so you have a month and a half or so. But again, give some thought to people that you know that are deserving of this award from SHPOA. And the actual award will be given at our fall membership meeting. With that, I'd like to have Jeff Willery, who's a former trustee, come on up here. Jeff, you're right here, along with Scott. Scott is our CIO and chair of our Communications and Technology Committee, and then Tom Hood, who's recently joined us as a trustee. So Jeff, let me get you first.
You have the clicker for me.
And that mic works too, so.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks to the trustees for inviting me in to talk about the Harbor Hustle. We are really excited about this race every year, but this year in particular. This race started 3 years ago. It's now the 4th annual event for us. And I was a trustee at the time when we started this, and the discussion really went around 2 things. The first of all, we're a community. How can we better build community, engage families, and so on? And a 5K, and we also have a 1-mile fun walk that goes along with that, is a great way to do that because you get people of all ages and you get a lot of families that the kids, the parents, even the grandparents are participating. So we thought it was a great way to continue to have a lot of the family community events that the borough and the chamber do on an ongoing basis. But there was a second opportunity. Many races are often charity races where you can raise money for a good cause, a local cause. And this is something that the trustees felt very strongly about, where we as a community can give back to our own community. And so the Harbor Hustle was started. And here are some pictures from I think this was last year's race. But one of the key things that happened last year and has continued this year is our local charity. When I started looking around a little over a year and a half ago for who to reach out to, there was an article in the Herald about a local family here on 105th Street, and they're in Medford in the off season. And the article was very inspirational. The organization is called Shells of Hope, and Kim, can you come up with me now? Kim is one of the co-founders of Shells of Hope, along with her daughter, who unfortunately is going through a second battle with brain cancer. And she wanted to be here today, but wasn't really up to it. Anyway, I ran into Kim, and I actually knew her son from surfing on 110th Street Beach, and it was an immediate hit. And there is nobody more energetic in this world about doing stuff for kids than Kim. And she has been really, really helpful in this. So I want to thank her and Shells of Hope and the opportunity that we have together. I want to encourage you all. The race is next Sunday. I'm looking around and I'm thinking not everybody here might be up for a 5K, but we also do a 1-mile fun walk, and it is fun, but there's other opportunities as well. You can sponsor. If you go on our website, and look, we've got posters everywhere, so you can't avoid us. If you go on our website, you can sponsor other runners and donate money through that. And that's a new thing that we're doing this year. So everyone can participate in that, but also come out to 96th and 1st next Sunday, 8 o'clock, and just cheer people on. It is, as I said, it is very much a community event. Mayor Tim Carney is going to open it up as he did last year. I always, 3 minutes, Tim, that's all you get. The race will be late. And so, but I really encourage everyone to come out. But when we talk about community, one of the things that this race has really meant to me is how Stone Harbor, how 7 Mile Island has come together as a community. So this is already out of date and I made it yesterday, but these are some of the logos of the local businesses that are helping us out. And you can see that the whole town is really coming together for this, to raise money for an absolutely amazing cause, to help pediatric brain cancer research at SHOP, again in our backyard, a world-renowned facility. But one of the doctors who runs the laboratory is here in Stone Harbor. It's on 106th Street. Very, very local, okay? And it's not just our business community that is helping out. And again, partial list. Individuals that are helping out to help us raise money, that are passing the word around. And I really want to thank everybody that's helped now, in the past. I got my Jays on Third shirt on. They have sponsored us every year. They have 10 runners signed up in the race, and it requires her whole staff to participate in the race. It's really, really great. So please come out, please join us. We're taking donations, continue online. We have a very aggressive campaign this year, but I think we're going to meet our goals. And I'd like to finish by just allowing Kim to say a word and about the race.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for everything that you do. I could not do this without you, for sure. He is equally as dedicated to helping the youth in the community as I am. He's been amazing. With Grace's second bout of brain cancer, I could not have done this for sure by myself. She had she was a freshman at Villanova, and unfortunately, as moms sometimes have an intuition, something didn't seem right. So I said, I think we better get that MRI. And sure enough, she had a recurrence around the brainstem. So we've been actively grateful, actively healing, and she's doing a phase 2 clinical trial in Georgia. The reason I bring this up is because I have no experience with cancer, thank God. Nobody in my family had cancer. So now that I've dipped my toe into this pond, I have a whole world open to something I didn't know about. And I really, truly am passionate about kids, and I have been for a long time. So I can't quite just think about my daughter. I think about every kid I meet. When we go to Children's Hospital, which is really the hospital that treats everybody in the South Jersey area, and you see the kids there that are struggling with the same thing that Grace is, first of all, they're all inspirational. We should all be as positive as every child is that's going through chemo, radiation, multiple surgeries. It's intense. But they all seem to share hope. They seem to share hope. And that's really how Shells of Hope was born. When Grace was in 3rd grade, she collected shells from this beach, painted them, and wrote messages of hope for her gym teacher's husband who was battling cancer. Then she did it for her girlfriend's mom who was battling cancer. We switched over to a clothing drive because she decided people were cold and we needed to help the less fortunate. Who knew that when she was 17 years old, she was going to have a brain tumor? And we were already sort of doing this Shells of Hope thing. But she said when she saw the kids at CHOP, Mom, we've got to help these kids. Imagine that. She's fighting for her life and she says, Mom, we got to help these kids. There's not enough cures. Well, guess what? She's right. There are not enough cures. There's not enough safe cures. There's not enough safe therapies. That's why she's not here today. She's undergoing a phase 2 clinical trial in Augusta, Georgia. We have to travel every month. She gets chemo for 5 days. She's on immunotherapy every day with medicines to help her not throw up. This is the reality of these kids. The biggest reality is the government, and I'm not bashing any government, this is just the way it is, only funds about 5% of all pediatric research. Who knew? I had no idea. So what does that mean? That means private places like Shells of Hope, private foundations have to help move the research forward. We need more research. We need to find cures. So Grace said, Mom, let's turn this into a 501c3, a nonprofit, and let's start raising money for cures. So 2.5 years ago, so my husband, Bill, he's the brains behind our operation. Stand up so they know who you are. This is my husband, Bill. He's quiet, but I could not do it without him, Shells of Hope, and couldn't do this hustle without all of you, really. And that's my main point. All of us together, we have no idea what's really happening, in other people's homes and in the hospital. Together, we're making a difference. Last year, Shells of Hope gave $50,000 to the Madsen Lab. That's the private brain cancer lab at Children's Hospital. It's not just going to pave the roads over there. It's going straight to brain cancer research. Dr. Storm, he lives actually on 101st. He's one of Grace's doctors. He's the chief of pediatric neurosurgery. His kids will be in the race, and I'm sure they're going to be joining SHPOA because I talked to him this morning and said, "Are you a SHPOA member?" So I'm sure he will be by the end of the day. But anyway, I won't keep you, but it's meaningful. What we're doing, it's meaningful, not just to Grace, but to all the kids that we meet. Shells of Hope in general does fund pediatric research right here locally at CHOP. They're starting a phase 1 clinical trial in the fall, which needs $1.1 million. So we're putting more money towards that. To date, I think we've donated $64,000 to CHOP Research. We've given 6 college scholarships, helped families who needed bills to be paid. We've done a lot of different stuff. If you're interested, you can go on our website, shellsofhopenj.org, and see what we do. Grace will be running, hopefully singing the national anthem at the race. But she wanted me to tell you, she's sorry she couldn't be here, she's not feeling well, but she is grateful from the bottom of her heart that you guys are all supporting her, supporting all these other families that really, really need it. So she said to tell you, you all bring hope, not just to her, but to the whole community. And we talk all the time about this Harbor Hustle at CHOP. Please spread the word. If you want to cheer, that would be great. This is a $100 donation sign. If you want to cheer on the racers with a $100 donation, hey, keep going, go for it. We still have time to make some of these. So I went too long, but thank you so much for listening.
I'll be brief. So this photo contest is entering its 12th year. For those of you not familiar with it, it's open to anybody. You don't have to be a SHPOA member. It starts on July 1st and ends on August 31st. We typically get around 200 photos, and then that's whittled down with a small jury to 12 finalists, and then that's opened up for anybody to vote online. We get hundreds of votes on it, and then we award prizes. You've seen some of these shots from previous years. Really get some spectacular photos submitted. A lot of nice sunsets too. So I'll hand this over. Thank you.
For the last 15 years, each year on the July 4th celebration of our nation's independence, my family sponsored and hosted an event on the Pavilion, 101st Street. We live in the neighborhood. We advertise it just in the neighborhood, and we do a reading of the Declaration that draws at least 70 people to the Pavilion. Well, this being AR 250, the semi-quincentennial celebration of our nation's founding, the mayor's been a big supporter of a lot of the events that are going on in town. I don't know if you've seen the advertisement of the many events. He's been really behind that. He heard about this. He said, let's get this advertised and make it bigger than your neighborhood. So together with SHPOA, we're expanding this to a town and SHPOA partnership, July 4th, rain or shine, 10 a.m. at the Pavilion. This year, it'll be facing out towards the beach because we're anticipating with this broader recognition of the event, a lot more than 70 people. It's a great event. Hear it for the first time. If you've never heard the Declaration, maybe this is the year to do it with AR 250 celebrations going on. Only takes about 15 minutes. I would tell you that's a convenient time of day, 10 a.m. Have your cup of coffee, get up, let the dog out, walk over to the Pavilion, hear that. You'll be done in 15 minutes. You'll feel patriotic. Hope you can make it.
Yep. So I'll pass the meeting, pass the microphone to Chris Campbell, who's chairman of our Borough Engagement Committee. And he's going to take us through the in many ways, depressing details of the REAL Act.
Well, thank you for that. And hopefully I'm not going to take you through that. I've got people who are a lot smarter and educated on that than I am. So, thanks everybody for being here today. We're honored to have 3 members of the Hyland Group. Hyland Group is a architecture and engineering firm based over in Claremont, right off of Route 9. They've been around for 40 years or so, and they provide commercial and residential architecture and engineering services, as well as some environmental services and surveys, et cetera. And so, we're really pleased to have with us John Halbruner, who's the president of the group, Faith Midgarden, who's the director of environmental services, and David Hayes, who's their environmental technician. And they're going to provide a presentation for us today about the REAL Act, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. It's well, I'll let them get more into the details of that, but they're going to provide a presentation for us, then we'll have some time for some Q&A from the crowd, from the audience, to talk about not necessarily specific things to your homes, but just general things about the Act and the impact it's going to have in our town and other towns here in South Jersey. So if you would, along with me, welcome them here, and we'll get started.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. We're going to give you a brief introduction to the Resilient Environment and Landscape Act, the REAL Act, by the NJDEP. What the DEP has done is they've recognized that the buildings that we're building today, or are significantly modifying today, are going to be here for years to come. So they're forecasting rising sea levels and more flooding events, and recognizing we shouldn't be designing for today's events, we should be designing so the buildings are still standing in the future events. You can agree, disagree with their science behind it, but the reality of sea rise is here. The rates, again, you could dispute, you can argue, but it's in one way never happening. So their initiative is to help build, or what we build today, still be standing here in the future. The entire premise behind it is they're forecasting what the sea level rise they think will happen in the next 100 years, and designing so that 100 years from now, buildings we built today are still here. As you mentioned, as you heard in the opening statement, we're a local firm practicing engineering, architecture, and environmental services. So we're pretty uniquely positioned to be able to understand the implications of that in virtually every facet of real estate development. And what we've done today is made a very simple presentation about some of the key impacts of the REAL rules as it affects you in Stone Harbor specifically. These regulations are hundreds, if not thousands, of pages long, but we're really kind of tailored down to just a few key points as it affects you as Stone Harbor residents. You're likely to have questions about your individual properties. We're going to need more information, and we're going to be able to address that here, but we'll be happy to talk to you outside the hearing, or even during the normal business day, and give you answers to your specific questions for your specific property. But hopefully today, you're going to walk away with a key understanding of the significant effects, and hopefully dispel some uncertainties or myths that may be floating around about what the REAL rules are and how it may affect you. With that, our environmental staff, some of the best in the country. Faith, take us away.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if I'm the best in the country, but I have been at the Hyland Group for almost 10 years, and we do sometimes refer to ourselves as environmental guessers because the DEP likes to keep us on our toes. As everyone will understand, the rules are ever evolving, they are ever changing. So today we are going to discuss these 5 topics, simply try to make it clear but accurate. And if you can take away something from these 5 points today, then hopefully we've done our job. So first and foremost, we want everyone to understand what are the current regulations today from a DEP standpoint, and then what are the projected new DEP rules known as the REAL rules, and what are their implications to you as residential and business owners in Stone Harbor. 2 is and part of that is understanding the design flood elevation today and in the future. And what is design flood elevation? Understanding specifically the forthcoming new rules impact on that design flood elevation, and then understanding the substantial improvement rule, how that impacts you residentially and primarily as a commercial business owner. And then, and I'm sorry, I already touched on it. What does this mean to you as residential and business owners? All right, so today, the current rules where I'll refer to it as the previous rules. They were known as the legacy rules. The most current version of that was amended July 17th, 2023. Those rules essentially terminated January 20th, 2026 of this year, and the new real rules became effective January 20th, 2026. There was a grandfathering period for the legacy rules that was to extend to July 20th, 2026 of this year. Only recently, as of maybe not quite 2 weeks ago, the DEP decided to extend the grandfathering period to July 20th, 2027. So in simple terms, what does that mean? It means that the legacy rules are still in effect today until July 20th, 2027, but there are a portion of the real rules that are in effect and have been in effect since January 20th. However, those portion of rules really aren't going to impact any of the subjects that we talk about today. If there are questions about that afterwards, we are happy to clarify that for you. But for now, we're going to talk about the grandfathering period and what you can do during this grandfathering period to insulate yourselves, if you want, potentially, before these new rules become into effect. All right, so how these new rules and the existing rules differ. Primarily, how it's going to affect you is the current design flood elevation. So what is design flood elevation? What does that mean? Design flood elevation is the base flood elevation plus what's called freeboard. So base flood elevation is determined by the current FEMA flood hazard mapping. And I would like also to clarify with a statement that the FEMA flood hazard maps have issued a series of flood hazard maps throughout time. The most current FEMA flood hazard map today that is utilized in Stone Harbor became effective October 5th, 2017. Therefore, when your home was built, the flood hazard areas at that time when your home was built may have differed than what they are today. The FEMA flood hazard map that is shown here displays different flood zones. We have Zone X, which is technically not a flood zone. We have the AE zones, which is you are subject to flooding with no velocity. And then there are V zones, which means that you are potentially subject to wave attack. The image here shows all of those zones. Those zones correlate with a number. That number stands for an elevation. So your base flood essentially is the number that is associated with your flood zone plus freeboard. Freeboard is a safety factor that's issued by your local flood prevention ordinance, which will take us to our next slide. Stone Harbor has a safety factor of 3 feet for your freeboard. So in a very, very simple terms, you have your BFE, which is your FEMA flood hazard area elevation, plus 3 feet. Now to make this just a tiny bit more complicated, that is the minimum floor elevation that can be in. Anything below that elevation cannot be inundated by floodwaters. Therefore, standard construction, or typical construction I should say, which is wood, cannot be inundated with floodwaters. So therefore, it's your BFE, your base flood elevation, plus your 3-foot safety factor issued by Stone Harbor Flood Prevention Ordinance, plus about 12 inches to allow you that space for inundation. In summary, it's your BFE plus 4 feet. I'm sure that may be confusing, but that's as simple as we can put it. You're going to have your FEMA flood hazard elevation plus 4 feet in typical construction. That is what the current ordinance is today. So, what's the difference with the new DEP rule rules? The DEP rule rules, they don't use the same terminology as what I just explained. So unfortunately, it's not apples to apples. The DEP uses a term called lowest floor, which essentially is the top surface of the lowest enclosed area. I'm going to try to make this very, very simple, if that's possible. The DEP's, with the new real rules, the biggest impact is they are issuing a new flood zone in entirety. It's their own flood mapping. And it's called the Climate Adjusted Flood Elevation. And it'll be a little bit more self-explanatory on the next slide, so try to bear with me. And we're going to refer to it as CAFE. All right, so the CAFE zone is essentially your FEMA flood hazard area plus 4. And then they have a requirement of a 1-foot freeboard, or lowest floor. So you'll see and David I think has a laser pointer. So your BFE, your FEMA flood hazard area mapping, If you are in an AE10, you start at elevation 10, you would add 4 feet to that by the new DEP standard, and then the DEP requirement of 1 foot. And that essentially, in simple terms, is 5 feet. Whereas we just previously discussed Stone Harbor's typical standard construction is going to be 4 feet above BFE. So right now, in theory, we're talking about a 1 foot difference. So I'm gonna let David talk about the next slide.
And you can take this. Okay, so now that we've introduced that new cafe zone, we want to make it sure you guys understand if you want to on your own, go to the DEP's own website, that's njgeoweb.com, and look at their flood mapping to determine if you guys are going to be impacted by that. So we have 2 maps on the screen now. The left is the FEMA map that we saw earlier, and the right is the cafe layer on njgeoweb.com. You can see they're very similar. That's because the state is using the FEMA mapping to determine their cafe zones. So the largest zone, or if we look at the colors on the right-hand side, we have the main area is blue, we have yellow areas, and then we have a small red area up in the top corner. Those are what you should be concerned with. And you can see they match pretty closely, and the blue area to start with is an area that corresponds with a currently FEMA mapped zone that has an elevation associated with it. Those areas, like an AE8 or an AE9, those areas automatically get the additional 4 feet applied to them. Very easy. It becomes more confusing when you see the yellow areas. Those correspond with our previous X zones per FEMA, which don't have a flood elevation associated with them. The DEP has determined in 100 years, those areas will have flooding, and they're basing that on applying the most restrictive adjacent flood zone, the cafe elevation of it, to those areas. And if those areas fall below that elevation, their grades in those areas fall below the elevation of that adjacent cafe zone, they have now mapped those into yellow. So for all intents and purposes, your blues and your yellows both have the additional 4 feet applied. We have a simple example. You can see, maybe you can make it out, the elevation 8 that's adjacent to these light brown areas. That elevation 8 would become a cafe elevation 12. And then the areas that are adjacent to that, the state has determined that their grades are below that elevation of 12. So they have mapped them in, and they include them in that additional 4 feet of elevation increase. The red area is easier. Those grades in those areas are assumed to be above the most restrictive cafe zone, so they do not have that 4 foot increase applied to them. Hopefully you can refer back to this slide, and it makes it easier. You can go on, the GeoWeb is a free service, but the key that they have is much more confusing than how it's described here. So hopefully that will help you understand it better. And I'm going to hand it over to John now to discuss flood proofing.
John, not yet. No. Just kidding, we're not giving it to John yet.
Okay.
So, trying to just add on to what David said, if you are not in a flood zone today, if you're in an X zone, unfortunately you do not escape the wrath of the DEP and their new flood hazard area mapping with the new cafe zone. Doesn't necessarily mean you will actually have to apply or comply with what they have, but you're going to have to prove to them that your existing grade elevation is above the elevation that's required per the zone that you're in, per your adjacent flood hazard area. So if you can take anything away from this today, per the legacy rules and per the Stone Harbor Flood Prevention Ordinance, you have a requirement right now of BFE plus 4. The new real rules are going to be BFE plus 5, and if you're in an X zone, that does not mean you are exempt. All right, so we've tried to simplify those terms as much as we possibly can. And what are the impacts to you as a residential homeowner or a business owner in Stone Harbor? There's the substantial improvement rule. The substantial improvement rule essentially is any improvement, renovation, addition that you may be doing to your home or businesses. If the improvement value is more than 40, well, the rule is 50%. Stone Harbor has a more stringent 40% requirement. And essentially, if your renovation or improvement is going to be more than 40% of that value, you are required with that improvement and the entire structure to comply with the current flood prevention ordinance, which is currently BFE +4 in simple terms. Now, how that will change is in the future, that will be BFE +5. If you do not meet the 40% and you are below that of your improvement value, you have to still adhere with, if you were doing it, let's say, an addition to your home, your addition would need to meet the current flood prevention ordinance at the time, but you would not be required to raise the entirety of your dwelling. So again, if your improvement is going to exceed more than 40% of the market value of your existing home, and your existing home does not currently comply with the elevation of the flood prevention ordinance, you would be required to raise the entirety of your dwelling. If your improvement is going to be less than 40% of the improvement value, then if you are proposing an addition, your addition must comply with the current flood prevention ordinance. And I'm going to let John speak now and let him take over.
Can you hear me? Just one quick point to emphasize when we talk about the 40% in Stone Harbor. That's not a single one-time event. It's 40% the market value of the home within any cumulative period of up to 10 years, 10 consecutive years. So if your thought is, I'm going to avoid this obligation by doing a construction today, and I'm going to wait next year, I'm going to do another one next year, the value of what you did last year is added to what you're going to do next year, and if that combined equals 40% or more, you are now crossing that threshold and must raise the building if your building is not conforming. So just the nuance there that people may not realize. That's particularly onerous when you think about this applies to even repairs. This is not just I want to do an addition. I've got some structural modifications or structural remediation I need to perform. That counts. So just a quick add-on to that note there. Okay. Wet floodproofing and dry floodproofing. You may have heard these terms, you may not. Maybe you do know what they are, but if you don't, I'm going to try and explain them to you. Wet floodproofing is almost a misnomer. You're not trying to floodproof anything. Wet floodproofing is a means of protecting a building and its materials by allowing floodwater into the building or into the enclosed space, letting the water rise, fall, dry out, and have no permanent damage to the building. This is commonly performed in every residential construction through the means of flood vents, where your crawl space will have flood vents that allow water in, and the vents that actually don't let the water out because they're above the ground, but it lets the water in so that there's no hydrostatic pressure being built up against the foundation. Water is equal on both sides. The vents make sure the water is equal on both sides. This is applicable to residential construction for non-habitable spaces. Your crawl spaces, your garage, your incidental storages, and your building entry points. It's not an option for living space. You're not allowed to have living space in residential construction when you're below the design flood elevation. But wet floodproofing is how most residential buildings are protected, at least those non-habitable portions. Now, dry floodproofing, on the other hand, instead of letting water in, what you're doing is you're making sure water doesn't get in at all. You're basically creating a watertight shell that keeps the water out. This puts a lot more stress on the building because now you're having water build up on the outside of the building and nothing to equalize it on the inside. So there's additional forces that are put on the building as a result. Dry floodproofing is not permitted for residential construction. You do not have the option of keeping a residential habitable space below the design flood elevation and dry floodproofing it. It's prohibited by local ordinances, it's prohibited by the construction code, it's prohibited by the DEP regulations. Where dry floodproofing comes into play, however, is in commercial space. Commercial buildings are allowed to have their lowest floor below the design flood elevation. But in order to do so, if they are new construction or they cross that substantial improvement discussion that we just had, they must be dry flood proofed. So how do you take a building and dry floodproof it. Well, first of all, the exterior walls themselves must be capable of keeping water out. Your standard wood frame wall with vinyl siding or cement board siding, that's not a waterproof structure. You're not going to be able to keep the water out through that type of wall assembly. Masonry and concrete walls, they certainly have that potential if they're structurally designed to accommodate that load. But then you're going to have doors and window openings. Well, those you need to do what's called floodgates or flood panels. You can actually cover those at times of flood events with a barrier that would keep the water out during that flooding event. Doing so constitutes dry flood proofing. Again, it's a very useful tool for commercial owners because most commercial enterprises, for handicap accessibility and even marketability, they want the floor to be at sidewalk level. They don't want it to be raised 4, 5, 6, 10 feet in the air. So that's the difference between dry flood proofing and wet flood proofing. Again, the big takeaway is if you're a commercial owner, you cross that substantial improvement or you're doing new construction, you are allowed to have the finished floor below base flood elevation or design flood elevation if it's dry flood proofed. If you have an existing building and you want to exceed that substantial improvement threshold as a commercial building, you have the potential to dry flood proof it, so long as the exterior walls are structurally and waterproof capable of keeping water out and you install these flood panels. Residential construction, guys, sorry, not an option.
One thing to add to what John had stated here is he explained to us, since he is the expert in dry flood proofing, is that, for example, if you're a shop owner in one of the strip malls and you were to make a substantial improvement, it wouldn't only be your shop that was subject, it's the whole building. So make note, if you have multiple businesses in one building, one improvement impacts the entire building, not just your unit space. All right, so we're gonna try to summarize this. What does this mean to you? Design flood elevation requirements, lowest finished floor. The new real rules are going to increase it. Deed restrictions, the DEP is going to require you to add a deed restricted. If and when you go for a flood hazard area permit, there is a requirement for you to have a deed modification in the form of a deed restriction. And essentially what this does is there's an attachment or addendum in your deed that in perpetuity states the inundation of floodwaters in the year 2100, which is the new CAFE zone requirement. So therefore, it's really just putting new buyers potentially on notice that there's the potential for a certain depth of flooding in and around your dwelling. Next, zoning implications. Higher finished floor potentially is going to impact building heights. How that's handled locally remains to be seen. Some towns are raising building heights, some towns are not. Again, these real rules, they are not actually, the legacy rules have been extended such that many people are not complying with the new finished floor or design flood elevations of the DEP yet. So it's just something to be aware of, that there could be potential zoning implications and the need for variances forthcoming. And then finally, we have heard rumor, nothing confirmed, that it could potentially impact insurance rates. So whether you plan to adhere to the new DEP real rule design flood elevation or try to insulate yourselves, which we'll discuss next, from the additional height requirement, it may have an impact on your insurance. We don't know yet, but there are rumors, and there may be some people here in the audience that know more than us when it comes to the insurance side of things, but it is something to be aware of. All right, so if you're a current homeowner, plan to make some improvements to your home, or you plan to rebuild, how do you insulate yourself from essentially what is the unknown? We know what the real rules were proposed to be. They may change, they could be more restrictive. Maybe they are more in alignment with what's in existence today in Stone Harbor. We unfortunately just don't know. What you can do is apply for a flood hazard area permit, and essentially what that does is you would apply for the permit and you would have a minimum design floor elevation that would comply with Stone Harbor's local flood prevention ordinance today. That permit is good for 5 years with the potential for a 5-year extension. Having an actual permit on the books and or submitting an application and being deemed administratively and technically complete by the DEP insulates you from any of the new requirements from the new regulations that are forthcoming July 20th, 2027, whatever those may be. Administratively complete and technically complete are two different terms used by the DEP for their review process. The administratively complete period is pretty simple. It takes them about 20 days. Technically complete, there's no standard, there's no requirement. We actually just had an application deemed technically complete after 89 days. The review period is 90 days. So in order to be confident that you're going to be deemed technically complete, if you choose to go this path, we do suggest that you submit an application before the end of the year. That way you're in and there's no doubt that you'll be deemed technically complete before July 20th, 2027. And we do have additional slides if this is posted on the website just for your general information, but we're not going to be reviewing them as part of this presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We do have 5 or 10 minutes for questions and answers. So,
Sure. I see your hand in the back.
Yeah, hey, market value on the 40%, is that including land or excluding land?
It does not include land.
Okay.
I'm not sure if anybody here can answer this, but I want to go higher. But I'm being told that I can't do certain zoning things because of Stone Harbor's requirements. So I'm curious if there's anybody here that can answer, are we changing some of the requirements in Stone Harbor? So if I go 9 feet, I can only have 6 feet of usage, and I'm told I need to put 3 feet of dirt in my crawl space, so it's 6 feet.
Yeah, I can answer the question about are they going to change it, but I understand what you're concerned. Stone Harbor has a headroom limitation on the non-habitable grade level space. And the concern, or the basis for that ordinance, I think, is to prevent those rooms from later, after CO is issued, becoming living space. So they intentionally limit the headroom to be able to do so. I don't know, does anyone know if Stone Harbor's anticipating any ordinance changes? I'm not aware of any that are in the works.
Because we want to do we said we'll do a drop ceiling, and we're told, no, you need to put dirt in from our architect, not from Stone Harbor. And I'm like, well, what's the difference? Like, if I put dirt in, dirt's going to flood out.
The difference would be concern that an underframe ceiling is easily removed. And I understand your frustration. That's where the regulations are today.
But dirt's going to come out. So if it floods, dirt's going to move.
So if you're doing a renovation, the 40% market value, how are we defining market value? It's not assessed value, I hope.
So the process would be, if you don't get an independent appraisal, if you were to simply submit for a building permit, part of the building permit application is a statement of what the anticipated construction costs are. The construction office is going to review that cost, and if it looks reasonable, they can't lie about it. Then if it's over 40% of what the tax assessed value of the building is, they're going to tell you, give us an appraisal or demonstrate that it's not exceeding 40% of the market value. What the city has available to them very easily is tax records. They don't have independent appraisals. That would be on you as the owner to provide them with an appraisal to demonstrate what the current market value of the structure is. And when you ask for that appraisal, make sure that you tell the appraiser why you're doing it, because you need the building separated from the land. Most real estate appraisals are done for real estate transaction purposes, where they don't separate the building from the land. They give you one lump sum number. You need to be separated.
If I wanted to go with the new rules, so I put in a new building application, even though they don't go into effect until 2027, can you build and put in an application under the rules that are coming down the road?
From the DEP's perspective, absolutely. Where you're going to
From the borough's perspective?
Well, where you're going to get jammed up with the borough is if you're trying to max your height out. In order to comply with the new real rules, your floor must be higher. That means you're going to remove that approximate 1 foot from the overall height until or unless the borough decides to modify their flood damage prevention ordinance to allow for or to determine where they're going to measure height from.
Borough's current height limit?
That's going to vary by one zone after the other. Yeah, it's zone specific. And I don't have the committed memory.
Oh, one more, I'm sorry.
Yeah, with the 40% market limitation, does that include repairs?
It does, yes.
So for example, if you need to replace your shingles on your roof, or your siding, or your windows, is that included in that?
The answer is yes. Now, I'm not advocating a workaround. I'm going to talk about the reality of how construction takes place. Certain activities do not require a building permit. Replacing a roof does not require one. Replacing a window in the same opening, without modifying the opening, but same size window, 1 for 1, that does not technically require a permit. So the construction office is going to keep a running total of building permit values that have been provided to them over a 10-year period. If certain things they're unaware of, you may have effectively snuck around the requirement, but technically, make no mistake about it, the value of that does count.
When does the 10-year period kick in for improvements to be
It's in effect now. Yeah, it's there. When the flood damage prevention ordinance was first created, and I don't know that date, but it's been quite a number of years ago.
What efforts are being taken locally and statewide to get that real washed away?
There is lots of discussion about that, and I have yet to find anyone who can give me a conclusive answer about what direction this is going. The real rules were originally introduced, and they were right around the end of last year. There was such an outcry by mostly people in South Jersey who were most affected by this, that the DEP rethought and actually lowered their climate adjusted flood elevation by a foot. It was originally going to be your today's base flood plus 5. They've reduced that to 4. I guess that was their concession. The rules became effective, and with the upcoming deadline of the legacy period, the grandfathering clause, if you will, coming this July, again, the continued outcry, both politically and privately, they've extended that for an additional year. The supposition now is that that additional year is going to result in some more changes. What those changes are, no idea.
Time for 2 more questions. Justine?
Now, this is going to be a situation where a little bit of knowledge on my part could be dangerous. Much of your presentation is directed towards building a new home or doing major renovations. However, I sat through a Coastal Coalition meeting where the presentation covered the fact that the real rules also require you to have significant restrictions and get permits that you would not have had to otherwise get from the DEP for things like replacing a fence or increasing the impervious surface. If you want to add 2 feet to your driveway and it's currently okay with the borough, you're still going to need a DEP permit. So my question is I think we need to empower our members to reach out to the people in our state government who are dealing with this stuff, because yes, it's a big deal for building a house, but I think 80% of people, 90% of people here are going, well, this is not going to apply to me in my lifetime. But if you need to build a fence, I believe one of the restrictions of the requirement is you can't have less than a 6x6 opening because they want the water to flow through freely. Well, then you got to talk about pools and all those other things. So maybe you should build a pool so you can replace your fence. You know? And so I think we need to know how we can address this with our legislatures, and maybe SHPOA could follow up on this and publish it to the members, like contact your legislators about this, because this is a lot more than just building homes. You go to the construction office and say, I'm going to replace my fence, and they're going to say, do you have your permit from the DEP? Which you can get yourself, the procedure's there, but that's craziness, absolute craziness. So I think we need to move on that.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Really appreciate the time and the presentation. No, this is just kind of a final slide here that our former Governor Murphy probably wouldn't appreciate, but the overreach is obvious, and as Justine was saying, you know, what can we do? We can contact our local and state officials, advocate for common sense regulations, and encourage the municipalities to use this delay effectively. So with that, I guess we'll move on to...
All right, good morning, everybody. That was fairly heavy, and now we're going to move on to something that's a little lighter, but still kind of intense. Anyway, thank you for coming out. I'm Susan Barrett. I'm a trustee here at SHPOA, and I also chair our sustainability committee. Very quickly, I would just like you to greet our committee members from sustainability and just get them to stand and wave to you. Barbara Friday, Justine Herzog, Phyllis Moore, Bob Scott, and Sue Warner. Just like to put some faces behind the work that we do. Sustainability issues are ever present here on 7 Mile Island and getting more complex over time, as the real presentation more than illustrates. We at SHPOA are specifically concerned with flood mitigation issues, water conservation, beach sustenance, bay dredging and maintenance, as well as responsible capital management around these issues by local governing bodies. So we're following, the financial aspects of all this too. A major issue that we were alarmed about this year concerned beach replenishment funding. Stone Harbor and Avalon had been due to receive new sand to repair eroded beaches this year, but in 2025, the federal government failed to include funding for this purpose in the budget anywhere in the United States, not just in New Jersey. However, in early April, Congressman Van Drew announced that he had secured short-term funding for a 2026 replenishment for specific South Jersey beaches, and he's also working on a longer-term solution. So Avalon and Stone Harbor will be included in the replenishment this year. Earlier this month, the Army Corps of Engineers announced definitive plans to refill critical portions of our beaches later this summer. And at this point, we're thinking August, but maybe pushing into the fall. We're not quite sure yet. Anyway, on that note, we're so pleased to welcome Dan Ginolfi, who's here by my side. He's a Senior Vice President of Warwick Group Consultants, and he's an Executive Director of the American Coastal Coalition. He will be answering some questions about the process of replenishment this year and giving us some info on the history of the process. He represents the needs of coastal local governments like Stone Harbor and Avalon in Washington, D.C. But I think we will agree that his most important credential is that he grew up surfing here in Stone Harbor. Before we get on to our questions, I just want to alert you that we will have an upcoming publication regarding the history of beach replenishment on 7 Mile Island dating back to the year 2000. So we'll blast that out to our membership and just be on the lookout for that, probably in the very near future. All right, so with that, we'll start with these questions, and we will hopefully have time for some questions from you guys when we're finished. So Dan, I'm going to hand this over to you. I'm going to share the microphone. You want this or you want another?
This is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so number one. Will you tell us why the beach had to be re-engineered by the Army Corps originally back in 2003?
Sure. Well, I just want to first start by saying thank you to Susans. Thank you, Chris, Mayor here this morning. Great to see you. I'm glad to be here. Warwick Group is one of the only firms in the nation that exclusively represents coastal local governments like Stone Harbor. So the work that we do, we work with Congress, we work with the Army Corps of Engineers, the administration, to make sure that coastal communities get the funding that they need. And one of the primary things that we focus on is beach nourishment. So why did we have to engineer the beach back in 2003? Well, one of my earliest memories is going down to Stone Harbor Point and seeing nothing but tide pools. If you guys have been there today, you know that there's 46 acres of nature preserve. It is deed restricted. There's no houses there, and there's a lot of life there. Birds come there. It's a major stopover area for migratory birds and basically all the species that you can see. The picture there on the left is what the beaches used to look like. And all of those rocks are under the current dunes that we have. Nothing's been taken away. It's too expensive. But basically, I had a time lapse that I wanted to include here. But if you go back on Google Earth to 1986, around that time, you'll see that there was no Stone Harbor Point. All of our beaches were severely eroding, and the town, as well as the DEP and the Army Corps, decided, well, hey, there's a lot of value here, not just in the homes, but all the people that come here from states outside of New Jersey, right? So we wanted to save everything that we have here today, and if we didn't do something, our beaches would probably look way worse than that. And I think one thing that most people don't know today, because Susan pointed out that there's a whole generation of people who don't even know that our beaches have been engineered. Those rocks are under there. Our beaches are actually bigger today than they were in the 80s. Most of the beaches in New Jersey are bigger today because of the work that we've done and the federal funding and the state funding that have contributed to make our beaches bigger and wider and safer for everybody.
Okay. What would likely happen if beach replenishments were to stop, and on what sort of timeline?
So we would slowly but surely revert back to where we were in the 1980s. Stone Harbor Point would erode. All of our beaches would erode like we saw in Avalon, the north end of Avalon after Hurricane Erin. Hurricane didn't even really hit us that hard, but those waves, all that energy still came and was extremely erosive. It would take probably 20 or 30 years to get back to where we were on a natural scale without major hurricanes, but one storm, as we all know, can do major damage. And it's why it's so important to maintain our dunes. A lot of people don't realize that we don't have seawalls today because they're extremely erosive. The dune is the only way we can basically have a natural seawall. Dunes act as a seawall, they're sacrificial features, but in order for that vegetation to grow, it can take decades. And dunes are really the best way to prevent damages without seawalls, which erode our beaches.
Okay, how can we prevent, other than dunes, beach erosion if federal and or state funding were to be eliminated?
So right now, federal beach nourishment is the primary way that most coastal communities maintain their beaches. It is extremely expensive. Fortunately, this year, we've been able to save about 65% on our beach nourishment costs. That's a combination of our work through the American Coastal Coalition with members of Congress to increase competition. But we were able to save the borough and save the boroughs about $4 million and the taxpayers about $30 million. So it's incredibly important work that we're doing. If the borough wanted to fund a project on their own, it could. I think certainly at the prices that we're seeing today of $16 million compared to the $46 million that was estimated, it can be done. Other communities throughout the United States rely on hotel taxes and other taxes like that contribute a small but meaningful percentage over a number of years, depending on your cycle. So your beach nourishment cycle. So in Avalon and Stone Harbor, it's 3 years. Other communities maybe 5. In Florida, it's commonly 10 years. Every community is different. It can be done. There are communities that do it. Right now, getting that federal money is huge. It's a lot of money, and it really helps small communities that don't have a massive budget, right?
Is there any advantage to backpassing or beach scraping? Intra-replenishment?
Absolutely. You know, there are areas, particularly Avalon's North End, they do that every year. There's a massive amount of sand between really 30th Street down to about the 60s. I was walking there yesterday, and beaches are massive. You don't want to sacrifice too much of their sand, obviously, but when there is a highly accreted area, it's fine to take that and put that in an area where there's exposed pipes or exposed rocks or something like that that are hazards to people.
creative ways to fund replenishments that you're aware of?
I think I touched on it. The number one way that communities are going about this by themselves are basically special taxing districts. So that's maybe a 1% tax on hotels, or in some cases some homeowners participate. But generally, this is something that is a volume approach where there's a lot of people and each are contributing something that maybe they don't even really notice. It's just a couple cents, but it adds up over a number of years to a meaningful amount of money that can be used for beach nourishment.
Okay, how about the point? What's happening there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of movement at the point. When this project was originally studied and then authorized, one of the primary things was that the jetty had to be notched. And what that means is they took out a few rocks to improve the sand bypass, to allow all the sand that we're putting on the beach, basically what I consider the island from jetty to jetty, will bypass the terminal groin at 120, whatever it is, 25th, 28th, and that will make it down to Stone Harbor Point. That literally created Stone Harbor Point. All the beach nourishment that we do today created Stone Harbor Point. You can almost walk to North Wildwood. A lot of that actually ends up on the inlet beach, whatever you want to call it, in North Wildwood. But it tends to stay in the system in Hereford Inlet. That's why you see all those shallow shoals out there. But as I mentioned earlier, it's an incredibly important stopover point for migratory birds and a variety of other species that live and thrive there.
Is there, and if so, what would be an advantage for a master plan to be developed for the beach? And could it dovetail in any way with state planning regarding beach replenishment?
Yeah, so the state is generally, the way that the state's shore protection fund is set up, it always prioritizes federal funds at the front end. So if there are any federal funds out there that are earmarked for the DEP's projects in New Jersey, they're going to first partner with those projects. Beyond that, and typically they run out because the federal funding has been consistent up until 2025. The DEP's really doesn't have any additional money after that. So that's an unfortunate reality for coastal communities. For example, our neighbors to the north in North Wildwood, there's typically not any beach nourishment funds left over from the state because they've all been allocated to the projects that are happening up and down the coast, the federal projects with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the most proactive thing that the borough could do would be putting in a special type of taxing district. At this time, it's just not needed. You guys are really not even halfway through your federal project, so we still have till about 2050. So at this point, we're pretty comfortable, but if federal funding were to cease, there are a variety of options on the table that you guys could pursue.
Okay, that ends the official questions, but we have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. But before we start that, I just want to also inform you that a state representative will be present for a hearing at this upcoming Borough Council meeting on Tuesday, June 16th at 5 o'clock. So we would really encourage people to attend either via Zoom or in person regarding this subject. It should be interesting. Okay. Do we have any questions for Dan? Jeff? Yeah, take us to him. Whoops. Let me just, I'll go. Oh, God. Thanks, Chris.
Now I have time. So you're well aware of how we do hydraulic fills today. I can't help but think if we've never done that before, you had a blank piece of paper and somebody said, hey, how are we going to get sand in? We would never, ever do it that way. I mean, we are moving sand, in some cases 5 miles, using massive dredges where the sand has ended up in Hereford Inlet. But before I got there, it was right offshore, 100 yards. Is the American Coastal Coalition doing any work to try to, you talked about the enormous costs for doing this and the pressure on the budgets, is looking for lower cost, more, I'll call practical solutions to get the sand before it migrates many, many miles when it's just on the other side of the breakers, so that you're moving the dredge instead of laying down 5 miles of pipe. Is there, and I know other places do that, and the equipment is available, and I know permitting is a big thing, but we always have to do permitting. So are there any active things going on that might bring that to fruition?
Thanks, Jeff, for the question. And the American Coastal Coalition is a national group of coastal communities. Stone Harbor's a member, Avalon's a member. We have nearly 24 members nationwide that all rely on beach nourishment. We focus on dredging and issues like that. Jeff's question is, can we get the sand right from off the beach instead of going from the inlets? Other countries do a process called rainbowing. Some of you may have seen this if you look into dredging or anything like that. The sand is pumped from the seafloor and then immediately blown out the front of the ship, literally like a rainbow, goes into the near shore, and then the waves naturally move that onto the beach. I've seen that in Australia. I've seen that in a couple other places. It's not actually allowed in the United States. I've asked. I wondered that same question. Why don't we do that? It mostly has to do with turbidity, particularly not here. We don't really have reefs, but places in California, they don't want to do that because it smothers reefs. But it is an option. It's not something that we do in the United States. The other issue is there are a lot of conflicts with fisheries. I know you're not talking about going out that far, but just in terms of permitting, it creates major challenges, and there's going to be a lot of pushback in that regard, but it is a good idea.
I just think it might be worth doing the clarification, especially because people see publicity of Avalon doing backpassing, and I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between backpassing and beach scraping, and I believe one of those is not an option in Stone Harbor. So, and, I'll see on social media a lot of chatter that why isn't Stone Harbor backpassing? So if maybe you could just elaborate, explain what they are, and why one of them doesn't work for us.
Sure, I'll do my best for that. I know what Avalon does, because if you guys have been to the north end of Avalon, a couple weeks ago there was literally no beach. Rocks exposed, some of the outflow pipes are still there, still exposed. So they have a large amount of sand tends to accrete just south of the Avalon Pier. And what they're able to do is harvest enough of that sand to not have an impact on those beaches, but have a major benefit to the north end beaches. I think what you're referring to with scraping in Stone Harbor is something that the DEP or the Army Corps may have proposed with scraping away some of the dunes. As I mentioned earlier, no?
Basically the sandbars, which is what I think Jeff was talking about, is how the sand in a storm is taken and creates the sandbars that we all see, and often the result of rip tides when they break through, and scraping that back up. Just offshore.
Oh, from just offshore. I think you're still going to run into a lot of the issues that you would with rainbowing, that process. Going in the near shore could also have severe impacts for bathers and things like that. It's just not a method that I think that the industry has come to accept.
I just wanted to give the borough's view of this whole topic. 7 months ago, the federal funding dried up for beach replenishment. And Avalon and ourselves, we went to Washington on a number of occasions. I sat in Congressman Van Drew's office and pleaded and begged. And he was able to earmark $46 million for beach replenishment here in Stone Harbor. And we're going to share that with Avalon. Avalon has a lot of damage, as it was mentioned here today. So it's not going to be a 50-50 split of that money. But here's the great thing about what was done, and there's a whole team that helped us do it, as well as our lobbying partners. This is $46 million. This is free money. We don't have to pay it back. We don't have to, there's no copay, if you will. There's no match. So this project has been a little bit delayed. I believe they're going to start in Avalon first. And I was worried that it would disrupt our beach enjoyment this year, and it will not. It looks like it's probably going to push to September for us. So, but if you're around on Tuesday, come to a council meeting, 5 o'clock, as Susan had said. The DEP will be here, and they're going to lay out when they're going to start, where the trucks are going to be, and they're going to take it block by block to see how you're affected. But by getting $46 million from the federal government, and this was FEMA money, we kept our $6 million in the bank for our beach replenishment. And we save every year for that. And that's growing, and that's a good thing. So lots of people helped us do that, and it wasn't easy at the federal level. So thank you. And thank you, Susan.
Oh, sure. Susan wanted me to point out that this episode of Beach Nourishment, we're actually going to be getting sand from Hereford Inlet, which Stone Harbor should be getting its sand from. Previously, there was a moratorium on the use. There was basically a federal restriction on certain inlets. You couldn't spend any federal money there at all. Our firm was instrumental in removing that barrier that was put in around the 1980s. Although Stone Harbor was able to skirt by in some of our initial years using Hereford Inlet, we are now able to use Hereford Inlet in perpetuity for the remainder of the project. So that is going to save the borough millions of dollars as every single episode as well. So that's going to be a huge amount of savings over the next 25 to 30 years.
Question.
Dan, we're up here.
Question related to the inlets. In Delaware, they for years have used eductor dressing, which essentially takes the buildup of sand in the inlets, puts it into a soluble solution, runs pipes to where they need it, and then spread it out. Is there any potential of doing that for us?
So the Indian River Inlet bypass system was specifically designed, like you said, because there are downdrift impacts. This is a fairly narrow channel where literally there's a pipe system that's set up that it takes a slurry, and I'm not sure if it's 24/7, but on a pretty consistent basis,
yes,
passes sand to the other side of that jetty. If you think of something like maybe Cape May Inlet, that would be a good example for you guys to think of. But for example, Townsend's Inlet or even Hereford Inlet will be too wide to get a pipe. It just wouldn't be feasible to get it under there. These types of more proactive management are something that we're seeing in the coastal space, and we hope to see more of in future years.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. That was one thing I failed to mention. One of the other obstacles or headwinds that we had was that the federal government prevented us from taking sand from Hereford here, which is a block or two away, and they made us pump it from Townsend's Inlet. It drove the cost up by 3x, and was a pretty difficult thing. We were able, again, to lobby hand in hand with Avalon. We sued the federal government, and we won, and that was opened back up. I think it was a political issue in one administration versus the other, but now when we look for sand, we're going to get it right in our backyard versus pumping it from other inlets, and that drives the cost down for the taxpayer.
Any other questions?
You just mentioned the 46 million. My question for you is how long of the time?
You meant to ask the question.
You just mentioned $46 million was part of the government grant. How many years is that to be used? Or is it just one project? Yeah, we have $6 billion and they have $46 million. So, no, I mean, we have a bank account with $6 million for ours compared to what we got from the government, which is that's substantially more. That's good.
So it sounds like the borough has about $6 million you guys anticipated to spend on this beach nourishment project. To make things simple, there's two types of appropriations. There's disaster appropriations, which are 100% free. That's what we got. The other type of appropriations, which your neighbors to the north, Sea Isle, Ocean City, Strathmere, those are through regular appropriations from Congress. Those have either a 65 or 35% cost share, which both boroughs have. Actually, to the north, they're 50-50. It's just a difference in when projects were authorized by Congress. It goes just a historical thing. They decided to change that more recently post-Sandy. So basically, in regard to the 46 million, only about 16 of that is going to go towards the project. So what are we going to do with the other 30? Well, the North Wildwood seawall, which many people don't know is actually part of the same project. I won't get into the details. But that Hereford Inlet seawall, which is in North Wildwood, is actually part of our project. And there have been rocks that have been falling in over many, many years, and there were actually some pretty severe collapses this winter. So one of the things that the Army Corps is looking about, and how much does those repairs cost? About $30 million, exactly what the savings are. So the Corps of Engineers and the DEP have been trying to figure out if that is the correct next step. We're not sure. Those details are currently being worked out, but the money does match up very nicely.
I just want to add on to what Tim said regarding financing, and I was just going to give SHPOA a plug here because we were instrumental in encouraging the borough to create a reserve for beach and bay maintenance and replenishment, which so annually now they set aside a certain amount of funds, which is now accrued to the $6 million that Tim is referring to there. So that's great news. I mean, it's small at this point, but growing annually because of the reserve that was created. So good for us. Any other questions? All right, well, we look forward to seeing you on the beach.
Yeah, so there's one more thing I wanted to mention, which is through the American Coastal Coalition, on Memorial Day, we launched something called the Yes to Beaches, hashtag Yes to Beaches campaign. And it's a coordinated national advocacy campaign of about 24 coastal communities, including on the Great Lakes. We have all coasts, Pacific, Gulf, and Atlantic coast, championing beaches. Stone Harbor's participating, Avalon's participating, just about all the communities in South Jersey, like I said, as well as other communities nationwide are participating. The purpose of this is to emphasize the importance of beaches and everything that goes with that. It's not just the expensive properties that are here. I'm sure everybody here knows somebody from Pittsburgh or Ohio or somewhere in Indiana who comes to use our public beaches here. And that in turn provides the federal government with $36 billion in tax revenue. We spend about 100 to 200 million. I know that sounds like a lot of money. To the federal government, it's pennies. We spend millions to make billions of dollars. It's the reason that Stone Harbor is still here today. It's the reason we all love to come to the beach. So hashtag Yes to Beaches campaign, you will find it online. Stone Harbor has been participating. If you guys would like to join, please share the content. We're getting the word out. Again, this is on all coasts. We're really excited about it. Through all of our members, we're going to reach well over 1 million people. So any way you guys would like to join, like, share any of the content, we are highlighting the importance of beaches, not just for those who like to go to the beach, but for surfing and boating and all of those types of things. So please check us out online, AmericanCoastalCoalition.org/Yes to Beaches. Thank you all so much for having me.
Tim, I'm just thinking a coalition between the borough and you guys, we can make some buttons, say Yes to the Beaches, and you pass them out.
We actually have some, so I will get some. Yep, I will get some to both boroughs. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
So we have a few minutes before we wrap up. To just answer any general questions you might have about topics that we covered today or things that are on your mind that we didn't talk about. Good thing. Schedule for the reconstruction of the 96th Street Bridge. Mayor, would you like to?
Let's see. It was supposed to be 20. It was supposed to be 27, and then the Coast Guard pushed back on permits, and then it was supposed to be 28. Then the DEP pushed back on permits, and then it was supposed to be 29. And where is it now? I think there's another entity that's the county is looking to get permits for. So I wouldn't count on it until like 2029, which is a good thing. And there's a phased plan which I posted on the mayor's Facebook and Instagram, and we have it on the borough website. But I'd be happy to kind of walk you through that. There's going to be a temporary access to get over it, and then there's going to be a point where you can't get over it at all, and then they're going to rebuild it from scratch. So it's going to be a long project, and we're just going to have to prepare for it. But not in my lifetime.
To mitigate flooding on the bay side, they were working with floodgates or something like that.
Yeah, we have As part of our Public Works department, we have a splinter committee. We love committees and subcommittees. The Stormwater Management Committee, and we came up with less expensive ways. I think it was like $60,000 levers down there on Sunset, where the areas that flood a lot, and we open them and close them based on the tidal information. And it was either that or, I don't know, $15 million for pump stations and things like that. But this committee's really good. They meet every 2 weeks, and they look at different parts of town and figure out cost-effective ways to keep the water away. But we live on an island, and water comes in, water comes out.
So it's much better than.
Yeah, it's getting better.
You're saying you control the gates where you determine whether they're going to be turned on or not?
Yeah, we look at the tidal charts, and Public Works does that. Yep.
How you doing, buddy?
Hi. Again, I'm Justine Herzog. I am a member appointed by the mayor and council to the Flood Mitigation Committee. I just wanted to comment. In addition to the valves that are being put in at the outfalls, and right now we have 3 of them at 93rd, 94th, and 95th, there are more of those planned, and they are kind of in the final engineering stages. The other thing that is planned is to raise the boat ramp at the marina, and that is actually a done deal. That is shovel ready. All the permits are done, the contract is done. That will happen at the close of this season. The other items, 8 to 10 more valves and some other features are down the road. But at this point, we are spending money to only put in the valves and operate them manually. There are some improvements in terms of an automatic operator that might speed the opening and closing. I just want to point out that the difference between putting in a valve to keep the bay from coming up the stormwater sewers and putting in a remote operated valve that you push a button from a control center, that's the difference between the borough spending about 200 grand on a valve installation versus 2 million for the fully automated. So, we are working for improvements, but we're also pursuing federal funds if they ever become available to do the best of the best. But now we're looking good, better, best, and we're trying to move from good to better.
No, it's working well.
Yes, also, Bonnie Parzak, Councilwoman, has pointed out that the word is the FEMA is now accepting applications again for these big tens of $1 million flood mitigation projects. So the borough is working very hard to go after that money, but do realize that we are competing with every other town in the U.S. So, but I'll tell you, there's no better people working on it than here in Stone Harbor. Every time there's a whisper of money being available, it's like a fire alarm went off in Stone Harbor, and the council and all the support systems just knock themselves out 24/7 saying, can we go after that money? So we're doing what we can, and we're moving forward. Of course, we wish it was faster, but I think we have a very reliable plan.
Yeah, I just had a question about reassessment versus reevaluation, and which one are we doing? I see that they're going to be coming into people's houses, which I thought was usually typically for reassessments. And what would be order of magnitude? I know it's very different for every property, but what would be the kind of the maximum you could expect for anyone's house to go up in terms of real estate taxes?
Well, I don't think first of all, the borough's going to be doing a reval, right? So essentially what that is going to do is they're going to look at all the properties in the borough and assess them to their market value. Now, as part of that process though, the borough will not be able to derive any additional tax revenue from the revaluation process. It's just going to reallocate the existing tax burden. So one property goes up and another property goes down, the tax rate will be adjusted so the total tax collected won't change. So it's just, again, so it's just a reallocation. So they will want to get into everybody's house. You can choose to not let them in, but then it's like they assume the worst, right? They assume that you renovated everything inside and it's all beautiful and it's, so they move you to the back. So it's really to your advantage to let them in to see what's actually there. But Bunny points out this process starts on Monday.
Yes. And I believe that the assessors group that we hired has 40 people covering the town, and they're starting on Monday. So we need to be ready, and if they can't gain access to the interior, they will still come on the property, which they noticed all the homeowners in Stone Harbor by letter. They will still come on the property and measure the buildings. They're hoping to access, when they knock on the door, they're hoping to access the interior, but if they can't, then there's a way of making appointments. And as Chris said, it probably would be best if everyone allowed them in. I have a great house, but I have a very old kitchen and some old bathrooms, and I'm actually glad right now.
So the process is, so you'll get a notice of your new assessment, and then you'll have the opportunity to challenge that if you think it's not correct. Be able to make an appointment, meet with the assessment company, plead your case, why you think that they were wrong, and they may or may not change that based on the conversation they have with you. But but it's hard to tell what properties. In big towns where you have more distinct neighborhoods, you sometimes have neighborhoods that have lagged in value, so they sort of become overassessed, and you have areas that maybe went up a lot more than average, so they're kind of underassessed, and this fixes that. That's not so much the case in a place like Stone Harbor, where you probably don't have these disparities. But
the assessments will redistribute the tax burden.
Right.
And I think that the main difference is they're going to use real market value as gleaned from the latest MLS sales. If you've got a spec house down the street that's a new house, and it's not going to be what the spec builder paid his contractor it's going to be what was paid on the market, on the open market for that spec house, and that's going to be the comparable. From what I understand, they're actually using the comparables in the MLS.
Okay.
Chris or Mayor or Bunny, I don't know who can answer this question, but my understanding is one of the driving forces behind this reassessment was that when new construction is built, new homes are built, they are not able to be assessed at the tax rate with their market value because there hasn't been an updated assessment in Stone Harbor. So what is currently in place, and I have a relatively new home, is inequitable because the borough cannot assess the new homes at their proper value without conducting this reassessment. Do I have that right, Guy?
Yes.
Thank you.
So along those lines, you had mentioned how there's going to be a redistribution for the borough tax rate, right? But with all the assessments going up, and my understanding was we are now about half the assessed versus market value. So what will that mean for the portion of taxes we get from Cape May County, which is a huge part of our tax bill?
Well, there's a man who works for the county. It's his job to align the individual borough assessments with with the other boroughs in the county. So they won't, and I can't recall what the name of this process is, but the county oversees that the equality of it all among the boroughs.
Do we expect the county portion to go along?
No, we don't.
So the county has to remain revenue neutral as well.
Yes.
What's the timeline for this reassessment? When it starts Monday,
Well, it starts Monday, and it'll be done by the end of the year.
They want to use the new assessments for the new tax rate
Right. Yep.
next year.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate everybody coming out. We will see you in September.